My name is Marcus Rivera. I'm 47 years old and I'm about to tell you the story of how I discovered at age 19 that my childhood wasn't what I thought it was. If this resonates with you, please hit that like button. It really helps me share these stories with more people who need to hear them. It was 1978. I was 6 years old and I genuinely believed that everyone's apartment building smelled like burnt rice and radiator steam in the winter, and that having cockroaches race across your kitchen counter while you ate breakfast was just part of life. I thought the brown water that came out of our faucet for the first 30 seconds every morning was normal. I thought the sound of sirens every single night was just the city's lullaby. I had no idea. We lived on the 4th floor of a 6-story walk-up on 163rd Street in the South Bronx. Our apartment had 3 rooms, and I mean 3 rooms total. Kitchen, living room that became my parents' bedroom at night, and the smaller room I shared with my 2 brothers, Miguel and Danny. The walls were painted this greenish-yellow color that I later learned wasn't a design choice. It was just decades of nicotine stains from previous tenants that the landlord had painted over. Badly. My father, Roberto Rivera, worked as a maintenance man for the city. He'd leave the house at 5:30 every morning, and I'd hear his heavy boots on the stairs, always taking them 2 at a time despite his bad knee. My mother, Carmen, cleaned offices in Manhattan. She'd take the 6 train at 4 p.m. and wouldn't get home until after 11 most nights. Back then, I thought having dinner without Mom was just our family's routine. Tuesday through Saturday it was just me, Miguel, Danny, and whatever Dad could put together when he got home around 7. Usually rice and beans, sometimes with a can of Vienna sausages cut up in it if it was a good week, as Dad would say. I remember the kitchen so clearly. The stove had only 2 working burners, the back left one and the front right. The oven door wouldn't close all the way, so Dad had rigged it with a wire hanger to keep it shut. The refrigerator made this grinding sound every 20 minutes like it was angry at us for making it work so hard. And the floor, I can still feel it under my bare feet. Those black and white tiles that were probably installed in the 1950s, cracked in a million places, with the edges curling up near the walls. But you know what? I loved that kitchen, because every Sunday, without fail, Mom would make arroz con pollo. The whole apartment would smell like sofrito and sazon, and she'd let me help her stir the rice. Those Sunday dinners were everything. I had this one toy that I treasured more than anything in the world, a transformer. Not the real Hasbro one, I know that now, but back then I thought I had the genuine Optimus Prime. It was made of thin, brittle plastic that Dad had bought from some guy selling stuff out of a duffel bag on the corner of Prospect Avenue. The colors were slightly off and it didn't transform smoothly like the one my friend Jason had, but I didn't care. That was my Optimus Prime. I'd play with it every day after school, making transformation sounds with my mouth because the toy itself barely made any sound when you moved it. I kept it on the windowsill in our room, right next to the radiator that would hiss and clang all winter long, sometimes so hot you couldn't touch it, sometimes stone cold for days when the building's boiler broke down. Speaking of school, I went to PS 123, 6 blocks from our building. I'd walk there with Miguel. He was 3 years older and took his job as my protector seriously. I remember the walk so vividly. Past the bodega where Mr. Gonzalez would sometimes give us each a piece of candy if we helped him carry in boxes. Past the abandoned lot with the burnt-out car that had been there for years, that we'd use as a fort. Past Mrs. Chen's laundromat where the warm air would blast out onto the sidewalk and feel amazing on cold mornings. The school had this cafeteria that served breakfast and lunch. I loved breakfast there. Those little boxes of cereal, the tiny carton of milk, the orange that was always slightly frozen if it was winter. I'd eat every single thing on that tray. Every crumb. I thought I was just a hungry kid with a good appetite. I never questioned why I was always first in line for breakfast, or why I'd get to school 30 minutes early every single day. Miguel would walk me right to the cafeteria door, make sure I got in line, then go to his side of the building. "Make sure you eat everything, Marco," he'd say. That was his nickname for me. One thing I noticed but never really thought much about was that Mom and Dad almost never ate with us. Dad would make our plates, rice, beans, maybe some chicken if we had it, and he'd sit with us at the table, but he'd just have a beer. "Already ate at work," he'd say. Too much, actually. My supervisor brought in sandwiches for the crew. Mom, when she was home on Sundays, would make the arroz con pollo, serve all of us these heaping plates, and she'd hover around the kitchen, picking at the rice in the pot with a spoon, eating standing up. "I've been tasting it all afternoon," she'd laugh. "I'm full from sampling." I believed every word. If you're watching this and you're starting to see where this is going, please leave a comment below. I want to know I'm not alone in this. There was this winter, I must have been 7, when it got so cold that our building's heat went out for almost 2 weeks. This was January 1979, and it was brutal. Single digits outside. Our apartment was maybe 50 degrees inside. Dad brought home these big sheets of plastic from work and taped them over the windows to keep the wind out. We all slept in the living room, huddled together with every blanket and coat we owned piled on top of us. Danny, who was only 4, would sleep between me and Miguel, and I remember thinking it was like camping, an adventure. Dad would wake up every 2 hours during the night to turn on the oven, with that broken door wired shut, just to get some heat going. He'd sit in a chair in the kitchen, watching to make sure nothing caught fire, just waiting for the apartment to get a few degrees warmer before turning it off and trying to sleep for another hour or 2. I thought all dads did this. I thought it was just what fathers did in winter. Mom would come home those nights even later than usual because the trains were delayed by the cold, and she'd find all of us nested in that pile of blankets. She'd smile, kiss each of us on the forehead. Her lips were always ice cold, and whisper, "Mis amores, my loves." Then she'd go to the kitchen, and I'd hear her and Dad talking in low voices. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the tone. Worried, tense. And then I'd fall back asleep to the sound of the oven running again. My clothes were always a little too big or a little too small. I wore Miguel's hand-me-downs, and he wore clothes from our cousin Hector. My sneakers, these generic white canvas shoes from Delancey Street, were always at least one size too big. "So you can grow into them," Mom would say, stuffing newspaper in the toes. "You're shooting up like a weed, mijo." I'd wear those shoes until my toes pushed right through the canvas, and even then, Dad would duct tape them and I'd wear them another few months. When they finally fell apart completely, we'd make the trip to Delancey Street, a whole Sunday adventure, and get the next pair. Again, one size too big. I didn't know any different. I thought that's just how buying shoes worked. There was this one time in 3rd grade, must have been 1980, when my teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was organizing a field trip to the Bronx Zoo. The permission slip said it cost $5. $5 for the bus and admission. I brought the slip home so excited. The zoo. I'd never been to the zoo. Dad looked at the paper for a long time. Then he said, "Marco, I'll talk to your teacher, we'll see." The next week, Mrs. Patterson pulled me aside. "Marcus, your father called me. You don't need to bring the $5. You're going to be my special helper on the trip." She said this with such a kind smile. I felt so proud. I was the teacher's special helper. On the day of the trip, I helped Mrs. Patterson take attendance, collect permission slips, and hand out bag lunches. I thought it was the best job in the world. Now thinking back, I understand what really happened, and it breaks my heart. The years went by. 4th grade, 5th grade, the same routine. Breakfast at school, first in line, lunch at school. I'd finish everything on my tray, and sometimes kids would give me their leftovers if they didn't want something. I thought they were just being nice, being good friends. Dinner at home without Mom most nights. Dad's rice and beans. The same pot, the same wooden spoon with the cracked handle, the same Goya cans lined up in our cabinet. We always had those. Looking back now, I realize we had those cans because they were cheap. Reliably cheap. A whole meal for less than $2. But I didn't know that then. I just knew that Dad made dinner, we ate together, and it was good. Miguel started working when he turned 14. He got a job at the same bodega where Mr. Gonzalez would give us candy. After school, weekends, he'd be there stocking shelves, sweeping, helping customers. He'd come home with $15, sometimes $20 a week, and he'd give it all to Mom. I remember being so confused by that. "Miguel, that's your money," I said once. "You should buy something for yourself." He just looked at me with this expression I couldn't read. "I am buying something for myself, Marco." I'm buying food so we can all eat. Even then, I didn't get it. I thought he was being dramatic, being a good older brother, but dramatic. It was December of 1985. I was 13. Miguel was 16. Danny was 10. We were all in our shared bedroom. Miguel on the top bunk, me on the bottom, Danny on the fold-out cot by the window. Miguel was counting money. He did this every Friday, counting his pay from the bodega and whatever else he'd made helping people carry groceries or shoveling snow. $23 this week, he said. Then he sighed. It's not enough. Not enough for what? I asked. He looked down at me from the top bunk. Marco, do you really not see it? See what? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, forget it. You'll understand when you're older. That phrase, you'll understand when you're older. I heard it so many times growing up, but I was about to understand a lot sooner than anyone expected. It was February 1997. I was 19. I'd just started at Hostos Community College, working part-time at a grocery store in Midtown, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I was still living at home. No way I could afford anything else, and honestly, the thought of leaving didn't even occur to me. This was home. Miguel had moved out the year before, got a place in Yonkers with his girlfriend. Danny was in high school, working after school just like Miguel had. One Saturday, I came home early from my shift. I walked into the apartment, we never locked the door when someone was home, and found Mom in the kitchen sitting at the table, just sitting there, staring at a piece of paper. Ma, you okay? She looked up, and I saw she'd been crying. Not sobbing, just silent tears running down her face. Mijo, you're home early. What's wrong? What is that? I pointed to the paper. She folded it quickly. Nothing, just bills. You know how it is. But I didn't know how it was. Not really. I'd never seen the bills. Never thought about them. Let me see. Marcus, it's fine. Mom, let me see. She unfolded the paper. It was a shut-off notice from Con Edison, the electric company. We owed $847, and if we didn't pay at least $400 by the 15th, they were cutting our power. I stared at that number, $847. How did it get this high? Mom's voice was so quiet. We've been on a payment plan for 6 months, but your father's hours got cut in December and we fell behind. My father's hours got cut in December, 2 months ago, and I hadn't noticed a single thing different. That's when something cracked open inside me. Where's Dad? Working a side job, helping someone move. He'll make maybe $60 today. $60 to pay down an $847 bill. Mom, why didn't you tell me I could help? I'm working now. She reached out and touched my face. Baby, you're saving for school, for books, for your future. But we're fine. We always figure it out. We always figure it out. I went to my room, the room that was now just Danny's and mine since Miguel left. I sat on that bottom bunk, the same bunk I'd slept in for 13 years, and I started thinking. Actually thinking. For the first time really looking at my life, my childhood, with different eyes. The breakfast at school. Being there early every single day. The dinners without Mom. Dad saying he'd already eaten. Those Sundays when Mom would cook but barely eat, always full from tasting. The field trip where I was the special helper. Miguel giving all his money to Mom every single week. The shoes that were always too big. The duct tape. The hand-me-downs. The winter when the heat was out and Dad stayed up all night running the oven. That transformer that wasn't really a transformer. The refrigerator full of Goya cans and rice because that's what we could afford. Every single puzzle piece came together in my mind, and the picture they formed was nothing like what I'd thought I was looking at. We were poor. We were really, really poor. And everyone, my parents, Miguel, Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Gonzalez, probably half the neighborhood, everyone knew it except me and Danny. They'd protected us from knowing. They'd built this elaborate shelter around our childhood innocence, and we'd lived inside it completely unaware. I sat there on that bunk bed, and I cried. Not pretty crying. Deep choking sobs that came from somewhere I didn't know existed inside me. I cried because my mother had been going hungry, literally not eating so that we could eat. I cried because my father had worked himself to exhaustion every single day, and then stayed up all night in the freezing cold to keep us warm. I cried because Miguel had given up his entire adolescence, every dollar he'd ever earned, to help keep our family afloat. I cried because I'd been so blind, so protected, so loved that I never saw the weight they were carrying. But mostly, I cried because I'd complained. I'd complained about wanting name-brand shoes, about wanting a real transformer, about wanting to eat at McDonald's like other kids, about stupid, meaningless things while my parents were deciding which bill to pay and which to let slide another month. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to Danny snore softly on his cot, and I made a decision. I was done being protected. I was done being shielded. I was 19 years old, and it was time to be part of the solution instead of part of the burden. The next morning, Sunday, Mom made arroz con pollo like always. The whole family gathered. Even Miguel came over with his girlfriend, Maria. We all sat around that tiny table in that tiny kitchen, and for the first time in my life, I actually watched what my parents did. Dad put food on everyone's plate, generous portions for me, Danny, and Miguel, smaller portions for himself and Mom. "I'm not that hungry," he said. Ate a big breakfast. Mom stood by the stove, picking at the rice still in the pot. "I've been tasting it all morning, you know how I am." Maria, Miguel's girlfriend, noticed too. She looked at Miguel, and he gave her this tiny shake of his head. She got quiet. I couldn't take it anymore. "Stop." Everyone looked at me. "I know you're not full, Dad. I know you didn't eat a big breakfast. I know you're giving us your food." The kitchen went completely silent. Even the refrigerator seemed to stop its grinding for a moment. Mom's voice was gentle. "Mijo, what are you talking about?" "I saw the bill yesterday, Mom. The electric bill. I saw you crying." Dad's face changed. "Carmen." "And I've been thinking about everything. All of it. The field trips I was always special helper for. The shoes that were always too big. The way Miguel gave you all his money. The way you never ever ate with us." My voice was shaking now. "You've been starving yourselves for years to feed us." Mom's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't say anything. Dad cleared his throat. "Marcus, that's not... Please don't lie to me anymore. Please. I'm not a kid anymore. I can handle the truth." There was this long, heavy silence, and then my father, Roberto Rivera, the strongest man I'd ever known, the man who carried water heaters up 6 flights of stairs and never complained, that man put his face in his hands and his shoulders started shaking. My mother went to him, wrapped her arms around him. Miguel was crying too, and so was Danny, even though I don't think he fully understood yet what we were talking about. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Dad finally said, his voice muffled. "I worked so hard. 2 jobs sometimes. Your mother cleaning offices until midnight, and still it was never enough to give you what other kids had." "But we had everything," I said. "We had you." Mom looked at me, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand, mijo. There were nights I'd come home and find your father crying because he couldn't afford to buy you new shoes. Nights where we had to decide between paying the light bill or buying groceries. It breaks something inside you when you can't provide for your children." "You did provide for us," Miguel said quietly. "You gave us everything that mattered. We wanted you to have a childhood," Dad said. "A real childhood. Not one where you worried about money or felt different or felt less than. So we did what we had to do." I moved around the table and hugged both of them, just held them. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner," I whispered. "I'm sorry I ever complained about anything. I'm sorry I took an extra serving when you were going hungry." "Don't you dare apologize," Mom said fiercely. "Don't you dare. You were supposed to take that extra serving. That was the whole point. That's what parents do." That Sunday dinner, we all ate. Everyone. I made sure of it. I watched my parents' plates like a hawk, and when they tried to give me more, I refused. For the first time in my life, I insisted they eat. And they did. Slowly, reluctantly, but they did. After that day, everything changed. I started contributing seriously to the household. Every paycheck, I'd give Mom half. When she protested, I'd remind her of every single time she'd said she was full from tasting and wasn't. Danny, even at 15, started helping more too. We became a team, all of us. No more secrets, no more protection. Dad's hours eventually got better. Mom retired from cleaning offices and found a day job at a school cafeteria. Better hours, benefits, less exhaustion. And slowly, we climbed out of the hole we'd been in. But the lessons from those years, from that childhood I thought was normal, those stayed with me. It's been 28 years since that Sunday dinner where everything came out in the open. I'm 47 now. I have my own family, 2 kids, a wife, a little house in New Rochelle that would have seemed like a mansion to 7-year-old me in the South Bronx. My father passed away in 2019. Heart attack. He was 71. In his last months, when he knew he was sick, we'd sit together and he'd tell me things he'd never told me before. About the nights he'd go to the emergency room with chest pains from stress, but tell Mom it was just heartburn. About the times he'd take the train to the end of the line in the Bronx just to sit and cry where we couldn't see him. About how he'd pray every single night that we'd never know how close we were to losing everything. "Did we do right by you boys?" he asked me one afternoon, "keeping it from you." I held his hand, so much smaller than I remembered, so fragile. "Dad, you gave us the greatest gift any parent can give a child. You let us be children. You carried the weight so we didn't have to. That's not just right. That's love in its purest form." He smiled. "Your mother and I, we just wanted you to have what we never had. A childhood where you could dream." And we did dream. Miguel became a nurse. Danny's a teacher. I work in social services, helping families in situations like the one we were in, trying to make sure their kids get the same protection mine did. Mom's still with us. She's 75, living in a nice senior apartment in Pelham Bay. Every Sunday, she still makes arroz con pollo, and now, finally, she sits down and eats a full plate with us. Sometimes I watch her eat, and I think about all those years she stood by the stove, pretending to be full. If you're watching this and you grew up like I did, if you had parents who went without so you could have just enough, I need you to know something. That wasn't poverty you experienced. That was love. Those hand-me-down clothes weren't shameful. They were your brother's way of protecting you. That special helper designation on the field trip wasn't charity. It was a community making sure you didn't miss out. Those dinners with just your dad, when Mom was working late, weren't absence. They were sacrifice. And those times your parents said they already ate or were full from tasting, they weren't lies. They were love letters written in hunger. Your parents didn't fail you because you didn't have what other kids had. They succeeded beyond measure because they gave you something those other kids might never have. They gave you parents who would literally starve themselves to feed you. That's not poverty. That's wealth beyond any measure. So if your parents are still alive, call them today. Right now. Don't wait. Tell them you saw it. Tell them you understand. Tell them thank you. You don't need a speech. You don't need perfect words. Just say, I know what you did. I know what you gave up. And I love you. Because I promise you they're still carrying the guilt of what they think they didn't give you, and they need to know that what they did give you was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Before I go, I want to hear from you. What's one thing from your childhood that you thought was normal but now realize was your parents protecting you? Drop it in the comments below. Let's share these stories. Let's honor our parents' sacrifices together. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more stories like this. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And please, go call your parents. Right now. Trust me,